I was a naval officer on a ship that hunted Soviet submarines. I came back as a junior officer to the Pentagon during Reagan's time when we executed the war plan to destroy the Soviet Union. Russia's a kleptocracy run by bad guys. But it's an economy the size of New York State that's in a demographic and economic death spiral. The president of China, who is in Rome today, runs a radical cadre of the Chinese Communist Party that is an existential threat, not just to the West, but to every nation on earth. I think it's very important in the long term for the alliance with Japan and India and Brazil and Europe to bring in Russia. And I would hope the United States would take the lead on that, but honestly, with the hate and discontent in Washington, it's going to take decades. But that sounds brilliant. I mean, I think the future, I think populist, nationalist, traditionalist, conservative sovereignty is the right side of history. Momentum's on our side. The flow of history is on our side. It's just very basic. Can we grab the moment? Can we grab the moment and drive it forward? Oh, I think it definitely can be reformed. I think if you look at leaders like Salvini and Orban and Kurz in Austria and the Scandinavian countries, the election last night, I think if you look at this new generation of leaders that are coming up, it absolutely can be reformed and it will be reformed. So I think democracy has never been more robust. In the midterm election in 2018, we had 113 million people vote. Trump lost. We lost the House. 113 million people, as robust and as dynamic as it possibly can be. Mainstream media in the United States, and I think in a lot in the United Kingdom, has been so ossified. Trump, right after we won, they're the opposition party, not the Democrats. We've broken the Democrats. They're the opposition. And that's how it's continued today. They are the principal opposition against Trump is the mainstream media. What so amazed me about the election in Italy, even more so than the disintermediation with Trump's Twitter account, was how Di Maio and Salvini ran their campaigns. Facebook Live. Bolsonaro focused and studied the Italian election, and he won on a budget of $750,000. 750,000, not millions, $1,000, under $1 million.
Meno di $1 milione.
In July of 2018, last July, Bolsonaro was at 15%. They studied Five Star and they studied Salvini. And the first round, they almost won the whole thing at 47% and then 55%. 100% on new media, totally disintermediated the entire mainstream media of Brazil. Trump's foreign policy is 100% different. Clinton, Bush, Obama is all essentially the same foreign policy. It's America as an imperial power with promulgating an expeditionary humanitarian force in search or in support of these global institutions. From NATO to the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea to the Northwest Pacific. We turned all four areas into protectorates and not to be allies. The international post-war rules-based order with an open security guarantee by the United States was just destined to fail. Now, whether it's NATO or the Gulf Emirates or the littoral countries around the South China Sea or South Korea and Japan, it's about having allies. So it's not this blanket American intervention everywhere, doing everything, sticking its nose in everywhere. America in support of its local allies where it's in the vital national security interests of the United States. When President Trump, remember, our first foreign policy visits, and this was done for a reason, Riyadh, Jerusalem, and Rome, in that order, in the first virtual 100 days of his administration. And it was essentially to say, strategically, you've never really thought strategically. So that the radical Islamic problem, the problem with Iran, and the problem in Palestine are all of equal importance. You've got to prioritize the problem. The number one problem is the exportation and the financing of radical Islamic terrorism. That this problem is centered around the Persian Gulf. I would actually argue that Qatar is the bigger problem, but there was a serious discussion with all partners there that this has to cease, and there has to be mechanisms, there has to be agreements, there has to be understandings that this is a problem because now it's a problem in the Gulf region. I agree with you 100%. Before you get the support against Persian expansionism, you have to stop 100% of the financing of the exporting of radical Islamic terrorism. I don't think Macron has, I think Macron's approval rating is still in the low 20s. It's come back, but it's in the low 20s. It's under 25%. That's not 1 point higher than the first round of the French elections. He hasn't moved at all. He's been totally flatlined to down. In September of 17, Macron laid out the whole program, further capital markets integration, further commercial integration, further military integration, further budgetary integration, for the Franco-German project. Macron has gotten no support whatsoever from the first round of the voting. And I certainly don't approve of the violence of the Gilets jaunes. But if you keep putting the burden for Chinese pollution on working class people in France, that's what you're going to get. First you take their jobs, ship them to Asia, then you make them pay for the pollution of that. Also, the City of London and Wall Street can make more money financing it. Well, first off, I propose that we stop whining and start trying to educate young people. We're in a great institution of rational, scientific thought. The environmental movement that those young people are backing is a new religion. It's a theology, not about science, it's about theology. And that is because conservatives have essentially ceded the field in education to the cultural Marxists. At the same time, we haven't held corporations and banks and our elites to have a real form of capitalism, not this neo-feudalism. Any surprise that young people both are attracted to socialism and attracted to these wild ideas on climate change? No. Because we haven't, as conservatives, contested it in the marketplace of ideas. And I think that's got to be a very high priority. That flag would be the flag of each nation. You don't need, as each nation has its own culture, its own way of doing things, its own outlook on life, and it's based upon its free citizens. Robust nationalism, that patriotism, that free citizenry, it's that flag of each country that'll be its symbol.
Trump, as you pointed out, you talked about the little guy and defending the little guy and economic populism. And Trump ran on that and promised to improve health care for everyone, defend the little guy. But the economic policy of the tax cut was heavily skewed toward the wealthy, and he's arguably done a lot of things to make it easier for what you call the elites of Davos. Do you feel he's lived up to his promise of economic populism for the little guy, or gone against that?
It's a great question. It's a great question. But remember, we won as a coalition. I reached out immediately to the Republican establishment, the RNC, to come on board in mid-August when we were down by 12 points, 14 points. We could not have won without the Republican establishment. And as any Faustian bargain that you end up making, there's payments for that. As you've seen in the press the last couple of days, we had a deal on health care that I didn't think was great, but was livable. And John McCain, whose Trump's endorsement allowed him to get back to the United States Senate, because without his endorsement, McCain would have been beaten in Arizona. McCain, after running on repealing and replacing Obamacare and promising us all the way through he was going to vote for it, back and at 2 o'clock in the morning, shifted his vote and put the knife in Trump. Personal vendetta. And Obamacare was not repealed or replaced. It was a one vote in the United States Senate. On the taxes, I argued in the Oval Office for a 44% tax on every individual that made more than $5 million. For the hedge funds in Silicon Valley and Hollywood. That would have broken the back of the Democratic Party. Bernie and them would have nothing to run on. It was shot down by two progressive Democrats that are in the Trump administration. Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin. Gary Cohn, the National Economic Advisor, and Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, both progressive Democrats. The corporate taxes were the biggest part of it and had to be done, and that's populist because it makes you competitive with China and Germany and starts to bring manufacturing jobs back to the heart of the country. So it's just like how you're trying to govern here. It's not perfect, but it's a process. And I think he's having more wins than defeats, and I think he's getting more populist and more economic nationalist every day he goes on. I think it's the reason that we picked the sequence we picked when we went to Riyadh, Jerusalem, and to Rome. I mean, it's Athens, Jerusalem, Rome, London, Washington. That's the core of the Judeo-Christian West, and Jerusalem is an absolute central part of that. It's a central part of our traditions, a central part of our laws. It's a central part of our customs and traditions. So yes, if the question is the defense of the Judeo-Christian West on the walls of Jerusalem, I think absolutely. And I think that goes back for millennia, and it'll go forward to the millennia in the future. Of your point, is it subjective? All I know is what I see, and I know working class people and middle class people. Economic nationalism is what binds people together. It doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, your color, your gender, your sexual preference. It matters that you're a citizen of that country, whether that country's Italy or the United States of America. It's the reason they're so shocked in the United States that now Trump's approval ratings among Hispanics are starting to rise. And the reason is wages are starting to rise since Trump's put in these tough measures against mass illegal immigration. African-American unemployment, historic all-time low. Hispanic, 40-year low. Wages are starting to rise. So from that perspective, the economic determinism, I see the economic results, and I think you're now starting to see the political results.
Hi, Mr. Bannon. It's Eric Reguly of the Globe and Mail of Canada newspaper. You're spending a lot of time in Europe. You're talking to populist leaders probably all the time. My question is, how intently are these populist leaders in Europe listening to you in the sense that what do you know that they don't know already? How are you helping them?
You know, it's a great question. When Marine Le Pen asked me to come and speak last year at the Front National annual conference, I said, what do you need me to come over? I'm an American. What could I talk about? She said, just tell us we're not alone. I have not talked to one populist, nationalist, political figure in Europe that didn't know 100 times more than I did about how to run local elections, national elections, how to win office. I'm not a professional political operative. I volunteered for Trump's. I had never been in a campaign office in my life before I walked in and took over Trump's campaign. Not even for a city councilman. And today, I never took a penny from Trump, and I've never taken a penny from any political figure I've ever talked to. My discussions have ever been what they have to do nationally or locally because they understand that 100 times better than I do. I just give them a chance to know that they talk to the devil. Salvini never needed me. The politicians here don't need me. They are fully capable of winning elections on their own. In fact, the reason the party of Davos that's headquartered in Brussels is so afraid has nothing to do with me. Because you have great rising stars like Salvini and Orban and Kurz and others throughout Europe. And you have a citizenry that's tired of going on bended knee to Brussels. That's what their fear is. Because the populist, nationalist sovereignty movement has great politicians, a great message, and now it has traction. That's why it's on the cusp, maybe, if the momentum keeps, through Spain and other nations, a stunning victory in May. There's two things on data I think that we have to understand. The first, and I have argued this for a couple of years, Facebook and Google and these big distribution methodologies have to be treated as public utilities and they have to be regulated. All the data has to be dropped down into a public trust. You as an individual generator of that data have to opt into the system. Now, you will have price discovery on how you pay for Facebook and pay for Google because they will no longer be free. But as a generator of that intellectual property, you will be the owner and you will decide how it's used and how it's monetized. And you will be the recipient of that transaction. But every bit as important is Huawei. Huawei is an arm of the People's Liberation Army of China. Let me repeat that. It's not associated with, it's not a partner with, it doesn't know them. It is a branch of the People's Liberation Army of China. 5G is not a linear progression from 4G. 5G is to the 10th order of magnitude different than 4G. It is the basis of all quantum computing and the basis of all future technological development. In the 5G system, data is like plutonium, and it can and it will be weaponized. Every telecommunications company that uses Huawei as a backbone, every system like in Turkey that has Huawei run its telecom system, is essentially having the People's Liberation of China run your telecom. Don't believe me. This comes from 2 Chinese colonels in the People's Liberation Army.
Is it?
This book was published in 1999. It's called Unrestricted Warfare. It says there's 3 types of warfare: information, economic, and kinetic. We can never fight the West with kinetic arms, but we can overwhelm and eventually destroy the West with information technology and economic war. And Huawei is a Trojan horse in the West to get your data and to eventually weaponize it. And the single most important event in the economic war of the West against China, which China has been at economic war with us for 25 years, was the arrest in Canada of the chief financial officer of Huawei. Canada.
In Canada.
The least aggressive nation on earth. Nicest people on earth. Do not believe for a second that it was because of sanctions against Iran. She's the key that picks the lock. Look forward to the day she's extradited to the United States and stands trial. I hope one of the politicians that are with Xi the next couple of days asking a question about Huawei. Thank you so much.